Sarah and Wade are doing such a great job with this program. Can we start by giving them a hand? Thank you. The theme, just to back up for a second, the first year of Opportunity St. Paul, we focused on substantive content, early childhood brain development, what lays down resilience in children and what strips resilience in children. And we learned a lot of content that could be hopefully useful as you do your work in tutoring and job coaching. The second year, we focused on skills. How do you do trauma-informed care? How do you do motivational interviewing? How do you actually do these things? And this third year, we're taking a deep dive into what are the barriers that people in the communities where we're volunteering are facing and having to overcome. So we did an evening on housing discrimination and how that affects what people's asset base is and where they can live. We did an evening, what was the last one? Sarah, help me here. On immigration, and what were the immigration patterns in the different neighborhoods, and who lives where when. And tonight we're focusing on transportation in the neighborhoods where we're working with our tutoring and job coaching work. And I am honored and privileged to be able to introduce my old friend, Representative Frank Hornstein, who serves in the Minnesota legislature and is chair of the Transportation Committee. Frank and I actually go super far back because Frank, in the 1990s, started a great organization called Jewish Community Action, and it was my privilege to be one of the board members helping him start that up. Vic Rosenthal's here. He's a subsequent executive director of Jewish Community Action. And because I know Frank, I felt that I could ask him to do this for us. You guys all came out on a really cold night, and we have a lot of really important content. But just before we start, Frank is going to give you the gift of 5 of his famous impersonations. And I just want to tell you that if you're nice to Frank, before we go home, he'll add one more. Frank. Well, it's your choice, the order. I think it would be fun, but whatever you want to do.
I was just going to give a speech and do these impressions a little later, but now I think the pressure's on to start with some impressions, right?
Everybody else.
Yeah. Well, first, before I do that, I wanted to thank Interfaith Action. I want to thank Randy. It's so great to see her and Vic Rosenthal here together because, as Randy said, the 3 of us were among the founders of Jewish Community Action. Both Randy and Vic were on our very first organizing committee. So they really set the stage for the group's formation and its long-term success. It's been 25 years now or more. So it's really fun to see everybody here, and especially these 2 amazing organizers and activists. And I first knew about Randy when she was working for a group called FLAG, the Farmers Legal Action Group. And this is amazing. I mean, in the 1980s, there was a very, very serious farm debt crisis roiling Minnesota and really throughout the country. And farmers were losing their land to foreclosure. There was a small group of very far-right radicals that were running around rural areas talking about how the farm crisis was the result of an international Jewish banking conspiracy. We laugh, but that threat of white nationalism is back with a vengeance. But Randy's group was on the front lines, really assisting those farmers. And so I just think you have such an incredible career advocating for justice, and I think your work here at Interfaith Action is an extension of that. And thank you for all of your work. I understand you're very involved in volunteering, the hands-on work of building a better world and improving people's lives every day. And that's really what my mentor, Paul Wellstone, used to always talk about, how politics is about improving people's lives. So Okay, a couple of impressions just to get us started. So I love, I'm not originally from Minnesota. I grew up in southern Ohio in Cincinnati, and I came to Minnesota via Macalester College. Loved it so much I stayed. So it's just great to live in the state where Bob Dylan grew up, right? And so I want to start off with a song that many of you know, because we are about change, right, and changing the world. And so I'll just sing the first verse, and then you can just join in on the chorus, okay? So if Bob were here, he might say something like this. Come and gather round, people, wherever you roam, and admit that the waters around you have grown, and accepted that soon you'll be drenched to the bone. If your time to you is worth saving, everybody, well, you better start swimming or you'll sink like a stone, for the times they are a-changing. Wow, you sounded great. I mean, I have not really experienced a group that just knew those lyrics right off the bat and sang them so emphatically. So this will be a good night. So we'll have some impressions others later on, but I did want to turn to a more serious topic, and my background is in community organizing, and I did that for a good 25 years before I got involved more directly in politics. I not only worked with Jewish Community Action, we were working on affordable housing and immigration and community reinvestment during those years in the late 90s. I also worked for an organization called Clean Water Action and did some neighborhood organizing. Actually, my very first job in organizing was in 1981, working for a group called COACT in Frogtown. So it is really, I knew this area quite well in those days. And then when my wife, some of you may know my wife, Rabbi Marcia Zimmerman, and we were married and went to, after we got married to New York, where she was finishing her studies in rabbinical school. So I worked at a neighborhood organization in Queens. So, but I made a transition in 2000 to do more public sector work, if you will, and I was appointed to the Metropolitan Council. We have a couple Met Council staffers here. Yay, thank you, Met Council. So I was on the Met Council when Ted Mondale.
I don't think I knew that.
Okay, well,
I'm relatively new at the council.
Oh, okay. So Ted Mondale, Walter's son, was the chair at the time. And I enjoyed that a lot, and a seat opened up for the legislature in 2002, so then I ran successfully for that. And it was really the Met Council experience that got me real interested in transit in particular. I mean, I always was, but I envisioned myself being maybe on the Environment Committee or something like that, but it was really the Met Council experience that got me interested. So I've been involved in the Transportation Finance Committee at the legislature ever since I set foot there, and increasingly over the years, and I think this, again, goes back to my organizing days, I see transportation as a core social justice issue, a core issue of equity, a core issue of fairness. And I say that because there is a nexus between affordable housing, transit, living wage jobs, education. All of these things relate to each other. If we are going to have a just and equitable and fair society, we have to have good paying jobs that people can get to. And so over the years, one of the great things about serving in the legislature is we have a lot of public hearings. We travel around the state and listen to what is on people's minds. And I will never forget this. This was maybe 10 years ago or longer. The Transportation Committee went up to St. Cloud. And it was in St. Cloud where someone came up and told our committee, and I will just never forget this, and I quote this all the time because I think in one sentence it summarizes, the topic for tonight. And he said, "What good is a job if I can't get there?" And I have heard that theme in one way or another over and over again. And so I heard another amazing thing just this past year. And we put together, I'm the chair of the transportation committee for it's a DFL majority in the House. And so one of the things I wanted to do again, as an organizer interested in hearing from people and in social justice, to have a lot of field hearings all across the state and the region. So we went to North High School in Minneapolis, and a newly elected Hennepin County board member by the name of Angela Conley said something that I'd never heard before. We were talking about the need to have better bus service in communities of color, indigenous communities, the north side, the south side of Minneapolis, and of course this area of St. Paul and other neighborhoods around the region. So she coined, maybe she, for me, coined the term mobility justice. Mobility justice. And so I want to talk a little bit about what are some of the principles of mobility justice. And I got these from an organization called Policy Link. Policy Link does all kinds of really great research on issues impacting low-income communities, communities of color. I think looking at a variety of issues from that equity lens. So I wanted to just touch on these different principles that they have come up with. Again, I think describing and discussing that nexus between housing, transit, living wage jobs, education. And so these are 5 principles. I just want to lay these out. And then after I do that, we'll have you maybe talk about it for a little while at your tables, and then we'll do a little report back. So interactive here. I'm not just going to talk at you for a half hour. So the first principle that Policy Link identifies is the need to create viable, affordable transportation choices. And what we mean by that is, every time there is a fare increase, ridership goes down. So I ride the bus and take transit almost every day because I don't drive. I was introduced at an event recently, and someone said, and now I'd like to bring up the transportation chair who doesn't drive. And I don't for a couple of reasons. Primarily, it's to keep all of you safe. About 3.5 years ago, after my youngest went to college and graduated and no longer living at home, I just didn't feel the need to drive. I mean, those of you who are parents, I have 3 wonderful children, and I like to say I was the chair of my family's transportation committee before the one at the legislature. And so the lease in the car expired, and I said to my wife, I don't really feel the need to get another car. And she goes, well, try it. And I tried it, and I found I was so much more relaxed than ever before, because I'm one of those defensive, cautious drivers. And so I go on the freeway, and people are, flashing their lights at me and scowling at me as they drive by, like, who is that? And so I take transit because I have a choice. I'm lucky to have the choice to take it. But I know the system quite well now. I know its strengths, its weaknesses, why an underfunded, chronically underfunded transit system that we have in this region, have had for many, many years, is a detriment for the people that take it. So a viable, affordable transportation system, folks need to know, in rush hour, it's $2.50 to take the system. That's expensive for a lot of people. For the people you work with, that's very expensive. There's a movement around the country now for free or very low cost transit. I think that's something we should be examining. Senator Marty, my colleague, has had a bill, I think, to have the fares at $0.25, and then I think you would see a tremendous surge in ridership. And so we need the transit options to be affordable. What do we mean by viable? A transit system to succeed has to go to places where people are going, and there should be lots of different parts of the region covered. Right now, if you want to commute from suburb to suburb, good luck. If you want to go from downtown St. Paul to Mendota Heights, where I went to Beth Jacob to speak last year, there's one small little van that you can take at about 5:30. And, also good luck if you need to go against the grain on a reverse commute. So because of the chronic underfunding, we have very limited options that don't make for a very viable system. I think the Met Council is doing a good job with the very few resources we give it. So that is very important. Again, the need to create viable, affordable transportation choices. Also, then ensure access to jobs. The airport, we are now in a campaign with the Service Employees International Union, SEIU, to create and ensure a $15 minimum wage for airport workers. So many workers at the airport. So many workers at the airport that have to, that are there 24 hours a day. There's no way to get to and from the airport at 2 or 3, 4 in the morning. So there's special services that are being used. But how many, again, people that are working 2, 3 jobs just to make ends meet? They don't have access to jobs through public transportation that is reliable, that is consistent throughout the 24-hour period that people are working. They are working. So, again, that second principle is to ensure access to jobs. Third, make our transportation investments equitable so that transportation supports all communities. And we have a great example of that just across the street here. And Vic Rosenthal knows this because Jewish Community Action was part of a broad coalition in this area to make sure that when this billion-dollar investment, known as the Central Corridor, the Green Line, came through, that it didn't just barrel through the neighborhood like I-94 did. I-94 was an equity disaster on every possible level. And when this Green Line was first proposed, I think it really triggered a lot of very, very difficult and painful memories among people who live in this community. So they organized a campaign called Stops for Us. I love that name, Stops for Us. And so instead of having one stop, maybe going from Snelling to the Capitol with one stop in between, now we have the ability to stop at Hamlin and Lexington and Victoria and Western. And so that the community that is most impacted has access, so people don't have to walk half a mile or a mile to get to the light rail. That is an example of investing equitably so that transportation supports all communities. Fourth, we need a transportation system and mobility justice that makes a positive impact on the health of a community. Again, there's so many things wrong with our driving culture, but one is that it really impedes our ability to create infrastructure for bikes and pedestrians. Biking and walking are viable transportation options and choices. Now, since I don't drive, I can tell you it's dangerous to walk. And we have had a surge in pedestrian fatalities, to the point where I think we've reached a tipping point around the region for bike and pedestrian safety. I was at a meeting right before Thanksgiving that a colleague of mine called in Eagan. 100 people packed a community auditorium because a 13-year-old boy was struck and killed biking to school. There was another. We went yesterday as a transportation committee up to the northern suburbs. We went and looked at the intersection of 85th Avenue and University up in New Brighton, Blaine area. And they've had many people have died at that intersection trying to get across it because it's this auto-centric culture where basically you have University Avenue, which is almost like a freeway with stoplights, and there's no sidewalks, and it's very difficult to cross the street. They have bus stops on the shoulder of this semi-quasi freeway that goes up there. So we have to make bike and pedestrian options safe, and we have to build the infrastructure so that people can use them. And of course, there's many health benefits to that as well. And finally, we have to promote environmental sustainability in this system. Do you know that transportation has now eclipsed electric utilities as the #1 source of greenhouse gas emissions? And it's the fastest growing source. And so that is why we have to have better planned communities, and transit are the keys in many ways to address this issue. So transportation is a climate justice issue as well. And the last part I want to talk about, and maybe it relates a little to all of these things, but certainly the first 3 points I made. The creation of viable, affordable transportation choices, ensuring access to jobs, investing equitably. PolicyLink talks about something called the transit time penalty. They did a study in 2015 which talked about how people using transit are spending 2 or 3 times more in their daily commute than people who are not. And who are the people that are penalized? It is the people you are working with that don't have that choice for a car, or don't, for many reasons, whether it's income or ability to, we have, again, a tremendous problem with, the resources needed to have the viability of the Metro mobility system and creating a system for people with disabilities. For whatever reason, I feel the transit time penalty every day, and I'm just going to have to, shortly after I finish, I'm going to have to leave because I'll have another hour and a half. But, I'd rather do that than drive. And I'm safer and you're safer, remember that. So there is a penalty that we have to deal with that creates this disparity. The disparities we see, income and racial disparities we see in education and healthcare and criminal justice, also exist in transportation. And that's manifested in the transit time penalty. So what I think we could do here for 5-10 minutes is at your tables, discuss maybe among yourselves how some of the issues that I outlined play out in either the people's lives that you're a part of through your volunteering, or just what you observe in the community. And so it's sort of maybe it's 2 parts. One would be to identify the problems that you see in the transportation system, and then what would be your vision to solve them? What would a modern 21st century transit system look like in your view? What would be your vision? And talk among yourselves, and then, we're not going to do the whole thing where I put this up and then we tape it. You can just, see, I love this. Everyone has been in those meetings. I just love that. But just, if someone wants to just volunteer and just share what your table talks about. So let's do that till about 10 after 7. We'll have a little report back, conclude, and then, we'll be on our way for the rest of the meeting. Yes, question?
Can I just give one piece of information?
Yes.
That you may have.
It's great. Let's pause for 1 second here, because I was going to talk about this a little at the end, which is, what is happening at the legislature with transit and transportation funding. But the way the transit system is funded, and the biggest system, of course, is Metro Transit. We also have what are called suburban opt-out systems, and they're basically commuter lines with fancier buses that go, to and from Plymouth and downtown Minneapolis, or to and from the southern suburbs. But for the Metro Transits, and there's also Greater Minnesota Transit, but for Metro Transit, it's roughly a third fares. Also, then another third comes from what's called the motor vehicle sales tax, and that funds transit and roads and bridges. And then the final third is through a combination of things. There's a metro sales tax, which funds the light rail, and then there's a little bit. We took it off the property taxes, but there's some federal funds that go into it. But it's roughly a third, and then the budget for Metro Transit is roughly $300 million a year. So to answer your question, it's about roughly a third of the cost is fare box.
I think that's important information.
Sure. Okay. Good. Well, let's do this. It's 7:02 now. Maybe at about 7:12 or so, we'll reconvene. So, talk among your.
We did 1.1 million folks last year.
It's unbelievable.
Yeah, for 12 days.
Yeah. All right, folks. I love it. It's always great when people start. No one's listening. No one is listening. It's great when people get so engaged and they're just, we will. Okay. Okay. As my 8th grade English teacher, Mr. Schneider, used to always say, I love this about Mr. Schneider. He had his issues, but tell you the story about when he stopped. I got sent to the principal's office simply because I was in the hallway getting my stuff out of a locker after school. Anyway, but so I'll tell you that story later. But Mr. Schneider used to always say, I still see a few pockets of conversation, which I thought was great because, you're a teacher in front of a junior high school class and you're trying to, but there's just a couple pockets, And then Alan Clark used to always go. Anyway, so let's start. Wade over here has a microphone, and he'll start with this table and then work his way across. And if someone could just talk about the highlights of, some of the problem issues that you identified, and then some of your solutions, that'd be great. Does anyone want to volunteer? This is always these people have leadership potential when they step up and.
These are problems. Time, attitudes towards children when you get on, both from drivers and other passengers. Attitudes from bus drivers and other passengers if you're boarding with children and there's some delay. All right. I think it's on.
Oh, there.
Yeah.
I will look down. And time and the bus availability in the non-rush hour. That's the daytime when people want to go out with errands, especially if you have children, and the buses aren't that readily available at good times. We also heard there's a bus driver shortage, and that people are retiring from busing, which makes that worse. So here are solutions.
I didn't realize that was coming to me. So our solutions varied a little bit from transit. So talking about protected bike lanes to address the biking and walking issue. The need for more buses, and obviously the need for more buses means the need for more investment. And more accessible buses so that folks who couldn't normally ride feel safer and on the buses. And then kind of the shared mobility idea of having maybe smaller vehicles that pick up a number of different people along the way, and and perhaps have some dedicated lanes associated with that. I think those were it.
Good. Thank you very much. Let's give a round of applause to table number 1.
So we talked about a few different things. We talked about like the anxiety of not knowing when one's bus is coming, and how there's
that feeling.
There's now, the official Metro Transit app, will show you like on like GPS exactly where your bus is when it's coming. So that's a good thing that already exists. We spent a little bit of time talking about bike infrastructure, and especially like here in the winter, what can we do to make sure that is a viable transportation option? And the solution for that is like separated bike lanes, also like off-street bike paths and stuff like that can be cleared of snow, like apart from the plows that clear the streets, because even when we have bike lanes in the streets, those get covered up by snow from the plows. What else did we talk about?
What's your vision maybe for an improved transportation and transit system?
I don't think we said this as a table, but I'll go ahead and say it right now. I would love to see like almost basically everything in the transit system become just like a BRT line.
Yeah. Well, that's
my
great.
dream.
Well, and that is a lot
Bus
of
rapid transit.
We'll talk about
like
that
the
at the
A-line.
end in terms of what we're doing in the legislature. Thank you very much, Table 2. So we have... Anyone here want to? Okay.
Okay, because the first thing that was noted was the fact that the spoke system that is used for buses makes it really difficult. In one case, if you live on the east side but you want to go further east, you first have to go west in order to change
Right.
buses.
Hearing
Go
that
back
a
east,
lot.
and then
Yes.
you end up taking a whole lot of time to do that. And that made the other comment come in, buses just take so much time. So, that was another thing that seemed to be just an observation. And then there's some ideas that are neighborhoods are trying to come together with car sharing services as a way to help with some of that.
Right.
And then the question, too, about pedestrians and the danger to pedestrians. In some areas now, they're starting to block off a lane and, excuse me, and have a concrete barrier so that when, a lot of times a pedestrian would get hit by one car stopping to let a pedestrian cross the street, and somebody decides to pass the car that stopped, and the car that's passing, the first car, hits the pedestrian.
Yeah.
And so having a concrete barrier there so there's no second lane at that point would help protect the pedestrians quite a bit. Something we didn't talk about, but I've had friends in the past who are from Washington and New York and areas like that, and when they talk about public transportation there, they usually talk about trains, and we've got just a very minimal amount of that with the LRT. But they also say, well, if they miss the one they're trying to catch, 10 minutes later there's another one.
Right.
And here it's like an hour, maybe 2 hours, or
Yeah.
maybe the next day. And we need to do something about that frequency.
Yeah, that's frequent service that gets to where you need to go is the key. And then one more, sorry.
Well, just one other positive thing was workplaces who sponsor the public transportation. So like all three of my kids and spouses, their workplaces pay for them, give them passes if they're willing to take public transportation to work.
That's good. There is some of that. So let's quickly, because we're nearing the time when we have a text study and some additional comments from Randy. So we'll quickly go to these two tables and then we'll wrap up. Yay.
Yeah, so we really echoed a lot of similar concerns that were shared in previous tables in terms of transit frequency or lack thereof, challenges with commuting to the suburbs and having to kind of redesign your whole life, especially if you have a young family or a family in general, where transit can take up such a large part of your life that you have to pay for more childcare, or you aren't able to participate in as many activities or something like that. In terms of solutions, I think our table kind of had different perspectives as to what would be most feasible in a redesign or enhancement of our infrastructure. But we did talk about what would it look like to have some smaller buses in addition to the larger buses, and what would it look like to have more frequent schedules.
Great. Thank you.
I could be really brief over here. In addition to things you guys have all said, one thing we talked about was circulator buses and the feasibility of those. I thought of at the University of Minnesota, or if you're going out to the suburbs, there could be a bus that just comes and goes. I thought of the rental car agencies at large airports where they're just coming through the terminal, you hop on, you get off where you need to. So that. But I also observed that as a privileged person, and I also choose to take public transportation as much as I can, and I still see the disparity. I still am privileged. I choose to take public transportation, and I find myself looking at people who are struggling with their children and their grocery bags from Target or whatever they're trying to carry, and then they get off the public transportation and they're trying to get back to the sidewalk, and it just breaks my heart.
And then
So
last.
I have a solution for that.
Hi. So we talked about, I run daily work, so I think some of the conversations stemmed around the transportation barriers that job seekers face. And so some of the things that we talked about were, working with employers who could help us partner with the legislature to create dedicated transportation routes to major companies. And one thought about that was like FedEx up off a Long Lake Road. That one's pretty inaccessible and has decent jobs and employs a lot of people. Another thing we talked about is how transit is often centered around moving middle-class people, and it's a lot of working-class people that need that. So the transit solutions are often focused on cars and how to move cars better.
Right.
And we need to be more focused on public transportation pieces. We also talked a little bit, it was routed to me late, but an idea to improve biker education so that bikers are safer and not causing trouble. I don't know if I represented that quite right, but biker education. And then I would add a thought that we didn't talk about, which is the TAP cards. For those of you who aren't familiar with those, it's Transit Access something Pass.
LA, they have that.
I'm sorry?
In LA, they call it TAP cards, I think.
Transit assistance program.
Yeah, Transit Assistance Program.
Oh, yeah, it's something different. Okay.
And those, for people who are on any kind of public programs, like you just need to send in like your photo ID and a SNAP card, and then the rides are $1 a piece. But from a legislative standpoint, I think more programs like that are really helpful to people. That makes a really big difference, because you're right, $2.50 a fare, that's a lot. That's $5 for just one trip. I mean, minimally. And if you're whatchamacallit, the transfer, if you're there 2.5 hours and you have to take 2 buses, that might be $10 a day. So that's a lot of money.
Good. Well, thanks. This is really helpful. It's great that you all were so engaged, and these are really good ideas. Many I've thought of as well. I'm interested in that whole circulator idea a lot, because there's a lot of people that have to walk quite a distance to get to their transit. So I'll just conclude with my own problem solution. Perspective from the legislature. So we do have a problem that you all have, I think, very articulately identified, which is we have a system that doesn't work for a lot of people. Works for some, but it's interesting. 80% of the people that use transit are commuting to work and to school, even for that. So for that group, there's still multiple problems in terms of frequency, and then we talked about the suburban issues, and we talked about the fact that at a certain point in off-peak, all of a sudden it just drops. I'll be waiting quite a bit longer now than I would have 2 hours ago. So we have an underfunded transit system. There's many reasons for that. It's become an ideological battle, actually. And I think, unfortunately, the other side of the aisle that I represent has been very, very hostile to all forms of public transit. So that has become a problem. And so when we have divided government, we can't get to where we need to go. Not only are they hostile towards the gas tax and the need to improve the safety and mobility on roads and bridges, but transit has been very, very challenging to get adequate funds. So this year we looked at this problem and created, I thought, a very, very good solution. We had the most transit funding in a bill in history. The bill we passed off the House floor. We increased the sales tax. That was our primary source of revenue. And that would have, I say would have because the bill passed the House. It didn't even see the light of day in the Senate. The Senate didn't even want to negotiate on it. I mean, we had not a very productive session when it came to transportation funding of all kinds. We got a little bit of money for Metro Mobility, but that was really it. So it was a real problem. But the House bill that we passed would have created the opportunity for funding for 20 additional what we call arterial bus rapid transit lines. Those have been incredibly successful. When I talk about arterial bus rapid transit, I'm talking about the A line. Some of you it's amazing. I take it all the time. And now we have the C line in Minneapolis, and there's a couple more that we need built. So we're hoping that the bonding bill this year will have support for the D line, which goes from the northwest inner ring suburbs, Brooklyn Park, down to the Mall of America. So there's also another one in the works that would roughly go along the lines of the 21 bus, but a lot faster. And then we have another one that would go from downtown down through Hennepin and through southwest Minneapolis. So, but we could do 15 more of those. And the ones I'm talking about, it's uncertain when they'll get built. I mean, it's sort of like we have this patchwork system. If we can get some money, maybe we could do one this year and then another in a couple years. That's not building out a system. We're behind our peer cities that we compete with for jobs and young people. Young people always talk about affordable housing and transit being the criteria for where they want to locate. So a great vision is contained in the House DFL transportation bill that was passed, but we made no progress on. And I do believe, that elections matter. Elections are really important, and it's going to really depend on the next election whether we can have some success in transit. Otherwise, we're going to continue to tread water. The system has not really had a significant increase in funding for over 10 years. So we're have a little bit of an antiquated system here in the Twin Cities, and it needs a lot of help. I will take a couple minutes for questions, and then we have a few special guests that Randy isn't aware of that are on their way. So.
Well, I was just wondering, I mean, we talked about the ideological divide now. But
The business, why isn't the business community doing more to support transit? Well, in Minneapolis and St. Paul, the Chambers of Commerce have been okay on that. Okay, they have good positions, but how much have they done? We want them to step up more. Other cities, the business community has been supportive. Here, our Chamber of Commerce has been just dead set against any increase in taxes of any kind. So that means they oppose our transportation bill in whole. Because they don't want a sales tax for transit and they don't want a gas tax and increase in the registration fee for cars to fund roads and bridges. By the way, you should just know, this is Transportation Finance 101, the gas tax is constitutionally dedicated for roads and bridges only. So if you're at a party and someone says, oh my God, I don't want the gas tax to increase so that there can be another train in Minneapolis, you tell them, it's in the Constitution. That money goes to roads and bridges only. Transit is funded another way. Okay, so tonight, you'll probably see the brunch on Sunday. That's going to come up. So Paul Wellstone used to say that to be successful in organizing and social change work, you need to have three things. It's known as the Wellstone Triangle. And those three things are good public policy, and I put policylink.org up here. So they have great, I was quoting a lot from them. They have great reports and stuff on transit and equity. So good public policy, but that, just because it's a good idea, isn't going to carry the day. You have to have grassroots organizing and lobbying. You have to build a movement. And I can tell you, good ideas die on the vine at the state legislature unless there's a movement behind them. The third one is involvement in elections. So that's what Paul used to say. And he'll be here in a couple minutes, actually, so we'll hear from him directly. But are there any other, we'll have time for one more question, and then, okay. Randy, I'm sorry, I don't want to go over time. You have an agenda here.
Take one more question, and then
Okay,
we'll entertain our guests, and then we'll...
Okay, so I saw 3 hands go up, however. So, but, okay, whoever had their hand up first, was it over here?
What I want to know is this only an urban, suburban
No,
issue?
not at all.
Are there rural trade-offs that could be made that would benefit? I mean, can public transportation in some way benefit the economy in outstate Minnesota?
No, of course it does. I mean, I was up in Crookston, Minnesota this summer. So in north of Crookston in Thief River Falls, there is a growing, very profitable company called DigiKey. And there's a worker shortage there. DigiKey provides a bus every morning from Crookston to Thief River Falls and then back in the afternoon. And if you take that bus, you make maybe $1 or $2 an hour more. They will give you that incentive and that bonus. And, Greater Minnesota is replete with stories like this. And plus, there's an aging demographic there, and people are literally stranded. Most of these rural communities have what's called a dial-a-ride service, but it's not always reliable, and it's also underfunded. Now, places like St. Cloud, Duluth, Rochester, Moorhead, they have their own transportation systems, but those transportation systems, there's a pot of money specifically set aside for what's called Greater Minnesota Transit, administered by MnDOT. Those communities suffer from the same kinds of issues that we've been talking about. So, this is a statewide issue. Nina, thank you for reminding us of that.
So it shouldn't be cut strictly along ideological lines.
Well, you would think, but that's not the case. I mean, it's just, it's a real vexing problem. I think that it's a top tier thing that the other side opposes. I mean, it's right up there with immigration. It's right up there with public assistance. It's a top-tier thing that we have a problem with them on. So that's only going to take place with organizing and movement building, and there's lots of good groups out there working on these issues, and we'd love to see you at the Capitol. So, speaking of the Capitol, I just love governors. I love our governors, and I've had some great experience with them over the years. It was Jesse the Body Ventura that appointed me to the Metropolitan Council. See, I just say Jesse the Body Ventura, and someone already laughs. I think it was really Ted Mondale that sort of made it happen. But I was very excited about this because I was told to come to a retreat of state agency leadership in the Ventura administration, and the governor would be there. So the retreat was, we show up at the Guthrie Theater and to watch Ventura's show on WCCO. And then he had the commissioners dress up in costume to play the role of something, whatever they were. So the commissioners, were good sports, and they did fine, and it was pretty funny. So after that, I went up to him, just to say hi. And so he's standing on the stage, and I'm below, and he is a tall guy, right? And he was even taller, just really towering over me, right? And so I went, hey, Governor, Frank Ornstein here, thank you so much for that appointment to be on the Met Council. I'm just really enjoying it, and it's making a difference, and just thank you so much. And he looks at me like, who is this guy? And he's like kind of looking around and looking down at me. And then finally he just says, well, it's good to have you there. I'm sorry, probably don't know him. But we have some people that know. So then when we get control of the government, if we have a Democratic Senate and House and a Democratic governor, I think we'll be able to pass a very substantial transportation bill. One of my regrets is we weren't able to do that the last time around. I think that there was a lot of reticence among the House Speaker at the time and the governor at the time. They wanted to do transportation, they were committed to it, but they were really worried about supporting a gas tax and what that might mean electorally. But myself and the other transportation chair at the time, this is 2013, his name is Scott Dibble, incredible progressive. I mean, we have marriage equality because of him in the state, and he's done all of this incredible work with homeless youth. But hey, he was the transportation chair at the time with me. He was in the Senate, I'm in the House, and we were about to have a press conference about our gas tax and our metro sales tax, our big transportation bill. But we kind of thought Dayton wasn't into it, but we weren't really sure. And right before we were going to do our press conference, he said to a reporter, "I oppose the gas tax. I'm not going to go there." So we then pulled back and did not do our press conference, and thought we would just have a meeting with him and see, what was going on exactly. And what we had proposed wasn't exactly a gas tax. It's very technical. It was called a gross receipts tax, and it's more than the gas tax, whatever. So I said to him, well, Governor, it's a gross receipts tax, so we'll actually get so much revenue that we can actually maybe even lower the gas tax. And at which point Dayton said, the people of Minnesota aren't stupid, though. It's the same thing as a gas tax. And, I think in many ways, from his perspective, he was absolutely right about it. I disagree, but... So then we went on to the next item, which was unveiling with... Charlie Zelle was the MnDOT commissioner at the time, and so we had an idea to jumpstart some of these rural and urban transit corridors to help business. We called it the Corridors of Commerce program. So we pitched that to him, and then he goes, the map isn't even in color. I just can't understand this. And anyway, so it was just a disastrous meeting. But anyway, love that guy and miss him. So now we have Governor Walz. Such a positive, energetic guy. and very committed to transportation. So, you know, I think if you had Walls here, and I know he would love to come here if he was invited, but since he's not here, he might say something like this. I just want to say Interfaith Action is fantastic. It works with volunteers, and of course, you all have taught me so much about the need for volunteerism and making people's lives better. So, you know, as a teacher, I applaud you. You know, my wife Gwen is a teacher. So, for all of you, all the teachers, thank you, teachers. Thank you. So, anyway, so 3 great governors. You know, I had some interaction with Tim Pawlenty, but I really can't imitate him. I really can't imitate him. So, last thing, you know, Paul Wellstone was so meaningful to many of us here, and so this impression is a labor of love. And if he were here today, of blessed memory, he might say something like, I just want to say, Interfaith Action's fantastic. You're making a difference in people's lives. Politics is about improving people's lives. Thank you, Interfaith Action. Let's go out, change the world, grassroots politics. Thank you so much. Anyway, yeah, I have the pleasure of teaching a class Vic teaches too, you know, I teach the undergrads at the U of M, and it's interesting because they don't know him, and so I do a video. I have a video of him. I have him explaining what the Wellstone Triangle is. So it's just important that we always keep him in our close at hand, close in our thoughts, transfer his values to the next generation. So thank you all so much, and.
Frank, thank you so much. That was great. And so now we're going to talk just for about 15 minutes about how can we think about the ways we can contribute to our neighbors' economic mobility. Frank talked about nothing happens without movement building. And I just want to say, you are a movement. You are a group of people who's come together around principles to make a difference in other people's lives. Every person here came out on a below zero night to keep learning about how to make a difference. And you don't just want to make a difference. Everybody here makes it a priority in their life to actually show up, most of you once a week or more, to make that difference. So where's it going to go in your life? You know, we're together now doing this. Some of us are in our first year together, our second year together, our third year together. And for some of you, the work in Opportunity St. Paul is just the right place to plug in. Bye-bye, Frank. It's just the right place to plug in. The tutoring or the job coaching or the ESL or whatever you've chosen is the work you want to do. But for some people, this program is really a crucible. You know, you go in, you have this set of experiences you hadn't had before. You're getting to know families and individuals. You're getting to understand reality through a lens that's not the lens that you would have brought from your family. And you're learning and learning community, and then there's going to come the moment where you come out of the crucible and you want to make a difference, maybe in another way, but you have to think about how. These are personal decisions. There's no right answer or wrong answer. We hope you're moved to want to stay involved and want to keep making a difference, but that you choose the way that's best for you. And tonight, we'd like to give you 2 different frameworks to help you begin thinking about this and sorting yourself into the right spot for you. Both frameworks come to us courtesy of a national nonprofit organization in North Carolina called MDC, which a million years ago stood for Manpower Development Corporation, and now it really focuses on how do you build equity and how do you build opportunity. And both of these frameworks use the word philanthropy. They talk about how can you make a difference in philanthropy, but they apply just as squarely to you giving gifts of time and talent and energy as they apply to like a foundation or person giving money. We've given you, we're not going to go through the articles tonight, but you have articles in your packet on each framework. One is by Jim Joseph, who was the U.S. ambassador to South Africa under President Clinton and the president of the Council on Foundations. And the other is by Susan Wisely, who was the longtime head of evaluation for the Lilly Endowment, a faith-based foundation. So the first framework, they're both laid out back to back on your paper. So if you start with the one that says a matrix for thinking more deeply, the first one says there's 4 traditions or 4 ways of making a difference. And the first is, they call it relief, or you could call it charity. Giving someone a meal, addressing an immediate need. If you look at the chart, the philosophy is love my neighbor, and the limit is the need is limitless. The second tradition is philanthropy as, or you giving your gifts towards improvement. A scholarship is the perfect example of that someone can improve their lives by having this. It's more than just a meal. It's teach a person how to fish, right? And the impulse is to maximize human potential. The philosophy is teach a person to fish. But there's limits to this too. What if the pond is empty and the rod is broken? Or another way to think of the limits is, what if you're giving scholarships, but this is before education was desegregated, and you didn't have access to a good school if you weren't white? So the third tradition is social reform or social change. And that dismantles systems. So you might think about it, the limit on the scholarship was, what if the schools are segregated? Social reform might be school desegregation. You're changing the way society is structured, and it's change, not charity, but what's the limit? Who's deciding what needs to be changed? Who's at the table? And the fourth tradition is civic engagement. And so the impulse is to build community. Everybody has a voice. And the philosophy is we need everyone to connect. And the limit is maybe so what? Does it lead to effective action? And so we're going to do a really quick exercise. We're going to take about 2 minutes for this. And my friends at MDC are doing this all over the country. You have a chart that looks like this, the allocations table. Pretend that you have either $100,000 or 100,000 hours that you're going to put into work to make the world a better place. How do you allocate it between those 4? Many people want some of each of the 4, like in their portfolio. But what I'd like you to do is take a minute and write your 4 numbers down, and then Wade's going to collect them. And then I'm going to give you like 3 minutes at your table to talk about how did you divide up and why. And Wade's going to do the math and tell us what our average is, and then we're going to talk about how this plays out all over the United States. So write your numbers. You have pens on your table. Wade's going to start taking your papers. And then at your table, talk for a minute about your allocation. Percentages or... Because it's 100, it'll be the same either way. So do percentages. Okay, Wade's going to come get... Thank you. Thank you. It's hard, isn't it? It's part of the test. It's not. Thanks, Nan. Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Did you guys fill out your papers yet? Sorry. Thanks, Julie. Here. Let's take a few comments. What were you thinking about how you wanted to divide up your portfolio? This table. Anyone? You can skip.
Part of it was that what we're here and what we're about in Opportunity St. Paul is giving of our time. So I guess we thought most of it was engagement.
Oh, that's
Or that was a
interesting.
big chunk of it.
Interesting. That's
We're
great.
engaging. We're not, donating thousands of dollars. At least I'm not.
Right.
Only when you turn it down.
No, but Joan, right. But Joan, the idea is if you could put your time into charity work or improvement work or engagement work or reform work, all those take time.
Yeah.
How do you choose how to allocate? Yeah. All right, it's hard.
Yeah.
It's hard. Table over here.
We didn't agree. None of us agreed on anything.
No themes. Okay. Nina's table, Julie, Vic, Chris.
We didn't know it was table-wide. We each did it individually.
Okay, did you talk about it or anything to share or not so much?
We talked about it conceptually, but not our individual numbers.
Okay. Rather than call on each of the tables, does anyone have something they want to share back about why they went one way or another?
Well, I thought our table was interesting because we had some very young, idealistic people who put it all in the social reform, civic engagement, which I'm not saying that. I hope that didn't sound condescending. I didn't mean it.
I know they're okay with it.
And then there was me who said, boy, that sounds great, but I just don't have any hope that'll ever happen, no matter how much money I put into it. So I put it into the top two.
Yeah.
A little bit more thinking, well, at least something like that.
Okay. Any other comments? Chris?
Yeah, I just wanted to comment that personally, I want to be grassroots and have one-on-one type thing, but what I think we need as a society is reform. So my own personal way that I spend my time is different than what I think we need as a society.
Yeah.
Okay. And is the way you spend your time, if you have $100 to give, is it also how you'd allocate your $100?
I gave less to my grassroots stuff and more to social reform.
I think that's really interesting. Really interesting.
But it has to do with my own preference.
Right.
That's how I want to spend my time is in the one-on-one.
Right.
Legislative, lobbying, all those things that are not.
You'd rather pay someone to do them.
Correct.
Yeah. Deb?
I thought personally, if we put more into reform, we would need less for charity in the future. If we can make those things happen, like if you can have transportation without cost,
Right.
then you're moving forward in a bigger way.
Right. Jobs and
And
everything.
minimizing the need.
Really smart. Janet and Sally and Deborah, and then we're going to move on. Janet.
I put some into charity, the very first one, just a little bit, just because people can't function if they haven't got help sometimes. And then a heavier amount in the second one to empower more people, because once more people are educated, more people have a voice. A little bit less in the social reform, because I'm white privileged and it shouldn't be my voice there. I could maybe help facilitate others to have their voice there. But I thought that shouldn't be my voice. I should be facilitating other people to speak. And then heavy in the civic engagement, just because I know the system enough, but again, using enough earlier on to bring along other voices.
Thank you, Janet. Sally? No, you're good. Yes.
Well, I just want to add, I put more into civic engagement too, because if you're having community and connecting, you're seeing the issues more, and I think the more people that see that, the more that improvements can happen.
Great. Vic, and then we're wrapping here.
I just think it would be interesting to have a future discussion about why we have charity in the first place. And if government actually did the job that it was set up to do originally, we wouldn't need to have nearly as much charity as we have today. So it'd be an interesting discussion about the invention of philanthropy in this country why we have it and what it's led to.
Thank you very much. This is fabulous. The numbers are in. Let me just say that that colleagues of ours are doing this allocation exercise all over the country. And when they did it in Minnesota, the charity number was the highest it was any place in the country. And also, Vic just says, why do we do so much charity? You know, some of it comes from our religious traditions, right? I mean, and so there's a whole discussion there about whatever faith motivates you to give of yourself. In what way do you want to choose to give of yourself? And the other thing they saw in the national experiments is, up in Minnesota, really high charity numbers. In the Deep South, really high engagement numbers. It wasn't that long ago that you couldn't vote unless you were white. And so civic engagement and voter registration, there's a huge emphasis there. And so it's different in different geographies. Our numbers are in. Wade and Sarah, thanks for doing the math. I'm going to round, okay, so it might not add up exactly to 100. Charity, 19%. Improvement, 27%. Engagement, 26%. And reform, 28%. And I will tell you that you as a group put less in charity and more in improvement, engagement, reform than I've seen in a non-Opportunity St. Paul group, in just a regular group in Minnesota, where there's this tremendous charity impulse and the need isn't seen to do something else. And so let me transition now. Thanks again for the quick math. Let me transition now to go over very quickly a second framework with you. Turn the paper over. This is Ambassador Joseph's framework that we all have 5 kinds of capital at our disposal. We have them at our disposal individually, and we have them at our disposal as groups and in organizations. He was talking about philanthropies because this was for the Council on Foundations, but it's true for all of us. And they are, we call the letters social, moral, intellectual, reputational, financial. So we say SMURF is the acronym for these 5 kinds of capital, okay? And so social is like Frank was saying, you can give me a good idea in the legislature, but if you don't get people to show up, it's going nowhere. And so social is like, can you motivate a group of people to do it? Can you use your social capital to make something happen? Moral is, can you take a courageous position that might be countercultural at the moment? In our time, we see each other doing it around equity and inclusion issues. Have you ever been in a group where kind of everybody's from the same place and they kind of see it the same way, and then you say, I'm going to blank. I'm going to put my pronouns on my signature. I'm going to bring my friend in who's looks really different from you, and I think you're going to be a little freaked out by it. It's moral capital. It's spending your moral capital on doing something courageous that you know is right. We all have intellectual capital or access to it. So you could sort of bumble along trying to make a difference, not bothering to do the research to see what's going to make the most difference, or you could spend the time and energy to get a little deep in the evidence. So, for example, the 3 literacy programs that you guys tutor with, we chose them because we did a year of research and found that these literacy curricula work really well for the kids, and a lot of other ones don't, and we didn't bring them into the program. Us deploying that intellectual capital makes this work stronger. And another example is, Frank talked about how we're trying to get to $15 an hour minimum wage for airport workers, and it's a great thing, and I hope he's successful. But if you look at the MIT Living Wage Calculator, this website that for every county in America tells you what it really costs just to get by, 15's not making it for anyone. And you can look up 2 adults, 1 working, 2 children. This is what you need per hour. It's in the high teens, 20s, and 30s, depending on your situation. Well, if you don't know that, you might think you solved the problem at 15. But if you do know that, you might behave differently. So that's intellectual capital. Reputational capital is a lot like moral capital, but it's acting to position yourself, so where you position yourself puts your reputation on the line. So for example, one thing that Interfaith Action firmed up today is this. There are a lot of people in our community who don't know what to think about people in prison. And when people come out of prison, what kinds of jobs they should have and what kind of community we should build together. And we've decided to commit our reputational capital to a program that we hope to build out as part of Opportunity St. Paul to build college in prison. And we're going to bring in for our annual assembly a graduate of a college in prison program, the leader of the college in prison movement in Governor Walz's administration, and someone who runs a college in prison program that's more advanced in another state. And we're going to look at the faith roots of that, and we're going to stand with people on that, putting our 115-year-old reputational capital right there with them. That's reputational capital. And finally, we all have some financial capital, right? And that's where you give your money. So that is the second framework that you might consider as you're sorting out the ways you want to make a difference. So in conclusion, I just want to say this. One of my most valued colleagues says, our job is to read reality truthfully and respond with affection. And now he's changed it a little bit, and he's saying, our job is to read reality truthfully and take action responsibly. So part of the design of Opportunity St. Paul is that this work helps all of us read reality more truthfully. You're tutoring a kid, you get to feel what that kid's life is in a way that you just wouldn't get from reading a book. You know, or you're coaching job seekers and you're helping them sort through the difficulties that they face. That is going to put in you the truth about reality in a way that the newspaper never would. So we're working together to read reality truthfully, and then we have to sort out what it means to take action responsibly in light of all that. And so hopefully these frameworks help as we think together over the next few years. Thank you.